Good morning to everyone, County Executive Shulman, County Executive Farrow, others in attendance online. So what I want to do today is kind of set the table for our conversations, and it's a 15-minute, 50,000-foot, very rapid overview of the state's housing situations. There's a lot of data on my slides, so I'm just going to highlight the main points. These slides will be available on the website and can be emailed out to you. I'm a state employee, so everything I do is a public record anyway, so you can use these for whatever you want. But since I'm a professor and since it's Monday morning, I'm going to start with a quiz because that's what professors do. So here's the quiz for you. Thinking about housing prices and rents in your city or region in the next 10 years, adjusted for inflation, do you want housing prices and rents to be higher than they are today, about the same as they are today, or lower than they are today? And of course, since I'm a professor, my students know this is a trick question because the incumbent homeowners in your city want them to be higher than they are today, but the people who are worried about housing affordability want them to be lower than they are today. And the truth is we're kind of pushing hard in two opposite directions in a lot of the ways we think about housing. On the most important issues, we aren't even sure that we have anything close to a consensus as to where we want things to go. Okay, so very quickly, I think of housing affordability as a puzzle piece, 4 separate components that all fit together. On the right side is demand, that's households and income. If you want the shorthand, what drives housing demand? It's people and jobs, right? And people, demographics change regardless of the state of the economy. People are born, they die, they have kids, they get married, they get divorced, they move, right? So our population is aging. Every year, everyone gets a year older, other than the alternative. And then income comes from the labor market. And on the supply side, we're talking about units and prices. So we're going to talk about demand first, and then supply, and then we'll put them together in terms of housing affordability. So on the demand side, again, lots of data that you can look at later in with your leisure. The key message is that Wisconsin, over the last 11 years, our households have been growing faster than our jobs, and our jobs have been growing faster than our housing units. What does this mean? This means that we have slow growth, but not no growth. We have slow growth in households and jobs and income, which is a good problem to have. It's better than having negative population and negative job growth. However, because we are adding jobs and people at a rate faster than we are adding housing units, that is the squeeze. Because when people move to a community for a job, if there's no housing available, well, first of all, they won't move to that community, or they'll just take the next available house, which puts a squeeze on the lower end of the income market and lower end on the housing market. We also have a problem, which is that renter household income is growing faster than owner household income, which suggests we have a significant number of potential homeowners who otherwise would have bought a home, who can't buy a home and therefore rent. And that puts upward pressure on our rental markets, and as we'll see later, that is a real concern with regard to stability of the workforce. So, demographics in terms of household size. We are growing in 1- and 2-person households, and we are not growing in 3- and 4-person households. This suggests that the demand for housing may turn in the next couple of years towards smaller housing units and different housing types that really accommodate 1- and 2-person households. Right, Wisconsin age population, we are declining in terms of everybody under age 24. We have very slow average annual growth of our working age population, 25 to 44. And again, I'd urge you to read Dale Knapp's publication with the Counties Association on some of the demographic changes we are facing in the state. Right? So to put this in a graph, millennials are the largest generation in American history. They are all at peak home buying age. This is your workforce. This is your potential home ownership market. Millennials are at peak home buying age, and as we'll show you later, they are not able to buy homes at the same rate in Wisconsin as previous generations. Boomers, of course, are living longer and staying in their homes, which is a good thing, but it also means that they don't recycle that inventory as quickly. Right? One of the things that's happened that you have to understand demographically in the last 2 or 3 years is that the rate of household formation amongst 25 to 34-year-old households has increased. What does this mean? This is the peak demand for housing purchase and rental. right? So we have this giant demographic bulge of millennials in the workforce that we want to recruit, we want to retain, we want to live in our communities, but they're all trying to buy the same units or rent the same units. We have slow to moderate growth in most of our counties. As you can see that we have clusters of growth in various portions of the state, the Fox Valley, Dane County, and then some of our western counties. Okay, in terms of housing supply, this is the big graph. If you get nothing from my talk, it's the big graph, right? So you go back to your basic data analytics skills. Something used to be high, then it fell down, it hasn't come back, right? So the blue line is lots that are created by subdivision plats, right? So this is, if you're looking to build a house, this is the building lot that you can build on. The green line is multifamily building permits, and the orange line is single-family building permits. We have not come anywhere close to recovering what we used to build before the Great Recession. And in fact, in 2022, both of those trended down from the high in 2021. If you prefer this in numbers, we used to build about 14,000 subdivision lots for homes. Now we build under 6,000, so that's less than half. As a housing economist, the biggest indicator you can look at is building permits per capita, or building permits per thousand population. We used to build about 6 3/4. Now we build about 3.6. So again, less than half of our production. Or if you want it in comparative terms to the rest of the United States, the red line is Wisconsin for the Badgers, and the blue line is the United States. So for most of the past, from the 90s into the early 2000s, we used to build housing at a faster rate per capita than the rest of the country. And our housing was reasonably affordable. Then beginning in about 2006, we shifted down like everybody, but we've continued to underbuild housing relative to the rate at which housing is built per capita in the national economy. So we have some catching up to do. One of these statistics is why I called my 2019 report Falling Behind. Again, a lot of data tables. Here's the key takeaway. In most of our urban counties, these are the ones that are large enough that we can generate population data every year. Right? This is, again, not to say that we don't have challenges in our smaller counties. We have added more people than we've added housing units. So in my previous report, the gap was about 20,000 units that were short, just total number of units relative to household growth. But if you look at the second to last column on the right, in the last 4 years, that has increased to about 27,000 units that we are short. So this is shortage relative to what we need today. This says nothing about the 140,000 that Dale has told us we need over to the next 50 years. And my own view is that that number itself might be small, because in Dane County alone, we need over 100,000 housing units between now and 2050. All right, so what does this mean? We're talking about workforce housing today, and we just have to say it clearly, as Jim was pointing out. Workforce housing is economic development because a house is where a job goes to sleep at night. And so in many of our most significant job center counties, we have a jobs housing balance well above the recommended level of 1.15 or 1.2. So it's no surprise here that Waukesha, Brown, Dane, Outagamie, La Crosse, and Eau Claire have the biggest gaps, because they're also, outside of Milwaukee, the biggest job center counties. What does this mean? In terms of workforce housing, almost any housing unit you build in these counties will be a workforce housing unit, because there's such a shortage of housing relative to jobs. What does this also mean? I'll give you an example, a metaphor if you want. On Tuesday, I got a haircut, and the two people cutting my hair, one lived in Baraboo, that's 45 minutes away, and the other lived in Janesville, that's 55 minutes away, right? And so when we talk about workforce housing, we're not just talking about police and firefighters and teachers and nurses. We're also talking about people in the service industry without whom our economies would just collapse. If they can't afford decent quality housing near where they live, near where they work, they get in the car and they drive long distances. That's why our other joke is that transportation policy is merely housing policy with wheels, right? So if you don't want to build more housing near where the jobs are, you better invest in high-capacity transportation systems. All right, as a result of not building enough, our housing is, on average, older than most of our neighboring states. 57% of our housing stock was built before 1980. Those of you in local and state government know older housing needs help. It needs upgrade, it needs repair, it needs improvement for basic functioning, not to mention improvement in terms of quality of life, energy efficiency, all of the issues in terms of accessibility for people with disabilities. Right, as Jim mentioned, the lending environment for any real estate or land development is very tight. In the first quarter of 2023, we've already seen net 70% of all banks and financial institutions are tightening lending standards. Right? Here's our other headwind, construction costs going up. So I scaled this for the last 3 years to January 2020. Single-family construction costs are up 36%. Multifamily is cheap because it's only gone up 35%, 1 percentage point less, right? So it is no surprise that Wisconsin's house prices have gone up in real value terms about 36% since January 2020. And here's where I stop, because I've learned that both with my students and elected officials, people don't really understand the economics of this, which is, why are used cars so expensive right now? Because they're unable to build new cars to replace it. Because the closest substitute to a new car is a used car. The closest substitute to a used car is a new car. That's the same with housing. In any year, at most 1 or 2% of your housing stock is new. So the rest is used or older housing. So when the cost to build something new goes up, the cost of the existing stuff also goes up. Right? And that's why we've had tremendous run-up in house price growth in the state. These are the median sales price from at the end of 2019 to the end of 2022. And there you see that across the state, house prices went up 30, sometimes 40%. For County Executive Shulman here, right? Washington County, house prices have gone up 32% or $83,000. In Waukesha County, they've gone up 30% or $94,000, right? So this has really put a squeeze on affordability. Right? As you all know, mortgage rates are high, or we might say they're returning to historical norms. Right? We kind of got spoiled over a while there with rates sub 3. And like a lot of you, I refinanced during the pandemic to a 2.875. So that's actually a good thing for me, but it's a bad thing for the housing market in a certain sense, right? That I can't afford to move because there's no way I could find something as good, right? So it tends to lock a lot of people into their housing, and that's good for that family. But again, a housing market to be robust needs a lot of production, a lot of turnover, so that prices can really signal demand. So here's what happens in terms of rising interest rates and rising housing costs. This is a double whammy for our first-time home buyers and for moderate income households who might want to buy a house, in this example, with a low down payment product. Here, the final line is that in February 2022, you could buy the median priced house in the state as a low down payment product with only $63,000 in family income. Now you would need $83,000 in family income. And that monthly mortgage payment has gone up 45%, both because the price of homes have gone up and because with interest rates going up, your purchasing power has gone down. So hopefully you can see this, right? Again, I don't want you to focus so much on the numbers as on the trends. The blue line is rental vacancy. We know that a healthy rental vacancy is about 5%. Beginning in about 2018, we've historically in Wisconsin been below that 5% level. And for homeowner vacancies, historically, we have vacillated between 1 and 2%, which is a reasonable level of home ownership vacancy rates in a non-superheated market. But ever since 2020, we have consistently been below 0.5%, right? So let's step back and remind ourselves. We have strong demand pressure, not just in our workforce and job center counties, but across the state. We have a demographic bulge of people who want to own homes, want to rent, want to live in our communities. We have limited supply. The supply we do have has become more expensive, and it's more expensive to build anything new. And this means that affordability has gotten worse in every one of our metros over the last 5 years. And I put up this slide because it's not just COVID, it's not just the supply chain, it's not just interest rates. We were trending in the wrong direction even pre-COVID. Okay, so what does this mean? Means that the home ownership rate for all age groups except for seniors has declined in the last 15 years. So the blue line is before the crisis, and the orange line is today. And this adjusts for the fact that as people age, they move to different age buckets. So particularly if you look at our youngest homeowner group, age 25 to 34, we've had a 6 percentage point decline in the home ownership rate. Right? So this is the squeeze, this is the problem for workforce housing. And of course, the burden of housing costs is not borne equally. The white home ownership rate has remained largely the same. The black home ownership rate has declined the most during these last 15 years. So here's where we just stop and say that in Wisconsin, our black home ownership rate is the 6th worst of all of the 50 states. Right? Nationwide, it's still too low. It's at the same level it was in 1968 with the Fair Housing Act passage, but in Wisconsin, it's about half of that national rate. So we have a lot of challenges. One of the things this means, as we move to a close in this talk, is that a lot of our current homeowners spend more than 50% of their income on housing. So I want to particularly highlight that fact that 43,000 senior households in this state are living on a fixed income. Their income is less than half of the area median, and they are spending more than half of their income on housing costs. That includes property taxes, utilities, insurance, and the like. This is clearly a market and a demand for a home repair and home assistance product specifically designed for seniors. In addition to all the affordable and workforce new production that we need to make, obviously, in our workforce in growing areas. And then I'll just close with this slide, that amongst all of our neighboring states, we have the highest rate of rental cost burden for our lowest income workers. And as we're talking today about workforce housing, I just want to remind all of us that people who make below 30% of median income are still in the labor market. They're still in the workforce. These are people who work in industries that can't afford to pay the type of wages necessary to afford a decent quality home near where you work. And so we have over 146,000 renter households in the state who are paying more than 50% of their income in rent. So just to step back and look at the big story. We have multiple crises, we have multiple pressures, and in some ways we were already in a slow simmer of our housing crisis pre-COVID. COVID, of course, with the supply chain, the demand increases, and all the ways that it messed up the way we interact with housing and the financial markets, has just put an extra heat on that fire. We hope in the next 2 or 3 years that we can bring housing costs down. On the construction cost side, interest rates will stabilize. But then we just go back to the pre-crisis crisis, which is still that we don't have enough housing, especially in places where people want to live. So I'll just close by saying that sometimes we talk about housing like it's really complicated. It is, but at one level, housing is simple but not easy. And it's simple because we need to build a lot of housing in places where people want to live. And where do people want to live? It's jobs and schools, right? Everybody knows this, jobs and schools. So why don't we build a lot of housing in places where people want to live? It's because the people who are already living there don't want a lot of new housing to be built. And that's why really excited about all the conversations we're going to have today on these panels.